All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. As I've been stressing in class, this one is probably the most complicated lesson that we're going to be doing this year. So I'm going to get you to make sure that you're pausing it at various times just to make sure that you're up to speed and have everything written down. But without a doubt, you're going to want to spend some time after the video is shown, going back, working on your own, trying to figure out the process of a nerve impulse. That way, when we come to class, we can kind of optimize the amount of time that we're going to have. All right, so like I said, we're talking about the nerve impulse, what actually causes that signal to go from some sort of stimulus and travel along these axons or travel along these neurons. All right, so main idea, we're looking all about the transmission of a nerve. So an impulse is how the nervous message moves along the length of the neuron. So how are we going to get it coming from the dendrites? Let me just get a pen up here. How are we going to get it from there all the way through here? Okay. So what is a nerve impulse? So it's an electrochemical message. So what happens is that we have all these ions that we need to have in our body, potassium and sodium, and they're going to end up causing a charge due to its differences in positive and negative charges. So like I was saying, it's created by the movement of ions across the cell membrane. So when we think about this neuron, don't forget it's still a cell. It may not look like our normal rounded cell, but still, when we have our weird looking neuron, things are going to be able to come in and out just like they would in any cell. So what actually happens? When we're thinking this, I want you to think like dominoes. Just like we stack up these dominoes in place, as soon as that first one's pushed over, as long as it's set up right, it's going to cause this cascade of events to happen where it continuously knocks down the next one, and next one, next one. Same thing. A nerve signal going through a neuron is the same way. As soon as the signal started, it doesn't stop until it's finished. All right, so things about nerve impulse. So this is your vocabulary. It's very, very, very tricky, so we have to make sure that we know these things. It's a fairly organized process, but what's happening in each stage is a little bit difficult. So resting potential, action potential, sodium-potassium gates, which are passive, sodium-potassium pumps, which are active, so no energy, whereas these ones use energy, depolarization, repolarization, and finally recovery. These are the 3 steps. And then these are the things that are going to be happening at each of them. So stop this real quick, write down the vocab. You're going to want to come back to this page after to define some of these things. So take the time right now to pause it and then write these things down. Now that you've written them down, let's talk about what order it follows. It all starts with the resting potential, moves on into an action potential, and then finishes off with a recovery state. So you don't have to write those ones down now because they're going to be coming up in more detail. So let's look at the first resting potential. So right now you're going to want to pause it to draw out this structure here. So if you think about this, so here's where our dendrites are, our cell body, and if we're talking about an axon, it's going to be flowing through this way to get to our axon terminals. So all you have to do, I don't really want you to draw every individual sodium. Just make sure that you draw it a replica of this. So make sure that there's more sodiums inside, or sorry, more sodiums outside than inside, and more of these potassiums inside. The other thing too, make sure you show all of these negative ions as well. So pause that and draw it out. So as I said, there's a greater concentration of sodium ions, so Na+, outside the neuron and a greater concentration of potassium ions inside. Inside the neuron has a relatively negative charge. This is due to chlorine ions and then also these amino acids which have a negative charge. And what that does is it builds up this difference where it's very positive outside and very negative inside. And what we call it is a resting potential. So it doesn't mean like if you plug a electronic device into this neuron, you're going to get something working. This just means that it's a difference in charge from the inside of the membrane outside. Okay, and it's usually around negative 65 millivolts. So little m, big V. Okay, so this is a key number. Okay, this is the one we're going to use. It's not always that, but this is the number that we'll use. Okay, so moving on. A little mnemonic device. Think kin. K is for potassium, potassium in. So kin is on the inside. And just as a measurement, just as a quick little visual for you guys, we know that that negative is going to be inside. So the difference between the inside and the outside is going to be about a negative, well, we said we're going to say negative 65 millivolts. Okay, and just as a heads up, we call this resting potential. It's when the neuron is unstimulated. So before any touch or heat or UV light or pH has caused that neuron to fire, it's going to look like that with a minus 65. All right, so like I was saying, the resting potential is our first step. The way that it gets maintained is by sodium-potassium pumps. In order for it to keep it at all of our potassium inside and our sodium outside, we need to actively get it there. So once it's ready, once it's been primed up, once we have our sodium and potassium where we want it, now we're able to actually go through this action potential. So I'll get you to draw this in a second, but I'll go through it first. So depolarization is the first thing that happens in this action potential, and it's caused by a stimulus, so some sort of outside influence that we perceive. So it could be a change in pH, electrical shock, pressure, which is which one we think of the most when we touch something, or also light. What it does is it causes sodium channels to open, and remember, channels are passive. And since there's such a large discrepancy between the sodiums inside and out, it passively passes through. And what that does is it reverses the polarity of this neuron. So instead of having this negative charge, all these positive sodiums coming in are going to cause this electrical potential to change to actually positive 40. And that positive 40 is a big impact for the reason that you're going to see next. So what it does is it starts to cause this wave. It causes a nerve impulse to start traveling down this neuron. And why? It's because the change in this charge here at this channel, because there's more sodium coming in, it causes the next channel to open, and then the next channel, and then the next channel. And sodium continues to go in, and it's all because these channels are what you call voltage regulated channels. So they only open when a voltage gets to a certain amount. And so what happens when these channels continue to open, the sodium continues to go in, which continues to cause a positive polarity in the cell. And this action potential is what we end up calling that wave-like motion of the sodium's charge changing. So what you can do is draw this out, just pretty much just show that the sodium's going in, and it's causing a change to this positive 40 millivolts. So you're going to want to pause it right now to do that. So this action potential continued, so it's still this whole part. After all of this is happening, we're repolarizing the cell, we're causing these positives to come in. What has to happen, we have to get rid of it. For this to stop firing, because after we touch something we want, okay, great, we touched it, now we're not, so how does it shut down? And it's called repolarization. So the potassium channels open up now, and what happens is potassium diffuses out behind this cascading neuron signal. So what it does is it restores the same potential. So since all the positives are leaving now, it results back in this minus 65. So it's ready to fire again in theory. And what is happening behind it is it's causing all these sodium channels to close, because again, they're voltage regulated. If these minus 65 is there, sodium's not going to be entering anymore. So you're going to want to draw this one down, so I'll give you a chance to copy it. So pause it now to do so. Okay, so recovery. So what has happened now? Sodium is entered. We caused our signal to occur. Potassium is left, so we caused this change back to our negative voltage. So we went from our positive back to our negative. So technically, in essence, our minus 65 is ready to rock. But now we have all of our potassium outside and our sodium inside the cell. It's the reverse of what we want in order to start this. So what has to happen? We have to actively pump back out the sodium and pump back in the potassium using our sodium-potassium pumps. So it has to reset itself in essence. So sodium needs to move back out, potassium needs to move back in, and then we do that using this sodium-potassium pump. So I'll give you a chance to write that down. But you can think about it as like a slingshot, right? After you let go of that slingshot, technically there's nothing ready to go. You've already let your projectile go. Everything's loose, ready to be pulled back again. But before it can fire again, you have to reset it by pulling it back. Same thing with the neuron. Okay, running out of time here. So like I said, neuron is ready to fire again. So we have all of our sodiums outside, potassium's inside. We still have our negative charge inside, so it's our minus 65 millivolts in both situations. The only thing that's changed when we're resetting this is what ion is on the inside and what ion is on the outside. You don't have to write that one down though. So action potential. So this is just a little recap here. I don't know if I saved you any room for it. So we have our resting potential. A stimulus reaches the threshold potential, which we're going to probably talk about a little bit more in class. Is what happens is when we have our outside stimulus, it actually causes a little bit of a voltage change. And because of that first voltage change, that's what starts this first sodium entering. Okay? So without that resting potential, or without that threshold being hit, so if the stimulus is only here, so it won't actually cause this. So for people that have taken chem before, you've seen activation energy. It's similar here. So we're going to spend some time on this in class. So if this one doesn't make sense, it's okay. Sodium opens, channels or potassium channels were already closed. And then what happens? Sodium channels close while the potassium opens. And then finally a recovery, which causes it to reverse, get back to its original polarity. Okay, last thing, and we'll try to keep this one under 12 minutes. The myelin sheaths, so these things that are covering our axon or our dendrite. The problem is that they're completely insulating, which means that sodium cannot get through there. So what it has to do, it has to enter only at the nodes of Ranvier, so where there's no myelin surrounding it. And what this does, which we'll talk about the mechanism in a sec, it increases the speed of the impulse. So when you look at an interneuron that has no Schwann cells, it's going to be moving at a slower pace than in our dendrites and our axons which are myelinated, for the mechanism we'll talk about in a second. So what it does is it causes this signal to jump from node to node, which we'll see in a second. And it's super fast, 150 meters per second. Okay, so let's look at the mechanism here. Is down here, we know that only movement and particles can go through at the nodes. So what happens is when things are coming in a regular interneuron, it has to flow through slowly from one spot to the next, causing the channels to open. But what happens, since there's only a node here, it causes a fluctuation, and it causes it actually to feel like it's jumping from one node to the next. So it makes it feel like you're going outside, but it's still really just causing it to happen at the node. So it'd be like a frog like swimming through the water compared to leaping over lily pads. I guess that's my analogy. This also we're going to talk about in a lot more detail. So really what I'm looking at here is all I really want you to make sure that you know are the three stages that are happening in each one: our resting potential, our action potential, and then our recovery. So make sure that you know what's happening at each of those steps. If you're good with that, you're good to go. If not, no tears. Come to class tomorrow. We're going to spend a tremendous amount of time and detail going over this. So hopefully that helps, and we will see you on Monday.